Hello, we are back. This is yet another series of 2016 Taking Back Your Life, where you guys know we have been talking about really cool principles on how to be the best version of you. And we're looking at it from a mind, body, and spirit totality, as we like to call holistic approach. My name is Clark Garrison. Many of you know me from the host of Survival Radio Network's The Conversation, which I've aired now going into my 6th year, where we inspire, motivate, and educate our listeners worldwide. But I decided to do this series because it was much needed. There are a lot of principles and ideologies out there to talk about success, but few cover that from what I like to call an out-of-the-box mindset. And so all of the people that we've had on really take a look at how to be the best version of you, but from a very different approach. And I think you'll enjoy today's show. And by the way, if you want to look at any of our past Taking Back Your Life series and who I've had a chance to interview, just go to my website at clarkgarrison.com. And that's Clark with a K-L-A-R-Q-U-E, Garrison with a G.com. And you'll be able to see replay shows of everyone we've had. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on our guest for today. Hold on, my little system froze. All right. Hey, my guest is a master astrologer and astrocartography expert, and she's also the creator of Easy Astrology Oracle Cards. Please welcome my good friend from the West Coast, Miss Maya White. Hi, Maya.
Hi, Clark. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you know, you're one of my favorite people to talk to because I've always been in love with astrology, but I didn't know much about it. So having you come on my show, the times you have, and really telling us the basis of that, and also following you on your newsletter has really helped me dive into that even more.
Well, thanks, Clark. You know, I regard you actually as a pretty good astrologer. So,
wow, you heard it. I got it recorded.
You always ask the right questions.
I have it recorded, so I'm going to save that soundbite. Let's start here. I always like to have a foundation of who you are and what you're doing and what we're going to be talking about. So the best possible question I could ask you now is, what exactly is the study of astrology?
Well, briefly and easily said, I'm going to say astrology is a study of the stars. And by that, I mean really looking up into the sky and watching the motion of the planets. And it goes back to very ancient times. You know, the early people, in order to survive, had to look up into the sky, and they had to know when was going to be the season to harvest, and when did winter come, and when was it going to be spring finally. So I really regard astrology as having a very organic beginning. It comes from people's, you know, man's desire to survive and need to survive on the earth. Beyond that, then we move into, let's say, the esoteric or the metaphysical applications, and it again goes to this thing, I think, you know, as above, so below, that really still we are an organic part of the universe that we're in.
Wow. You know, it's if you think about the definition or the history that you just told, and that the layman, just people on earth, had no choice but to understand what the stars and planets are doing to survive. And here we are in modern technology. And if you ask somebody to point out the North Star, they would probably shoot you. I know, I almost think, again, and we talk about this a lot in this series, that technology has really crippled us as a species.
Well, that's a deep subject, right? I mean, I know that it's done a lot of good things too, but yeah, you know, I lived a lot of my life, I would say, very organically, you know, back to the land. I lived in Maine for many, many years, and you know, I've done the whole you know, cutting wood and raising vegetables thing, and I appreciate technology deeply. I appreciate that I can go on the internet and get an answer to almost any question that I have. But in terms of astrology and the survival of the people, yeah, you know, it is in that way very simple. And then beyond that, you know, one of my favorite examples in terms of helping people understand maybe how the ancient people would look up into the skies, what would develop is that there would be times, like, let's say when an eclipse came. An eclipse is something that almost everybody would see. And really, you know, the ancient astrologers or priests or whatever got so they could predict that. They knew when it was going to happen. But a solar eclipse, for example, if it were visible from that part, would often predict the death of a ruler, or, you know, or somebody important to the people. And you know, then they just fine-tuned it, right? The way that the moon looked, the position of the moon in the sky, if it was a cup, that it was holding water, or if it was tipped sideways, that it was pouring water out, could indicate that it would be a dry or a rainy season ahead.
Wow. I just hearing you talk about that is I'm in love with it, because not only is it from a kind of romanticism point of view, as you said, kind of describing what you see in the sky and it having a relevant result here on Earth, but it's factual. I mean, it really, you know, as much as we want, or I hear people say that it's mythology and it's, you know, it really doesn't work. It is a science, it is proven, and it does work, and that just makes it all the more relevant.
Well, yeah, and you know, I mean, even mythology works, right? I mean, mythology is a story of people. It's a story of all the, you know, good and bad things that people do, and you know, so again, it's just this. It goes back to kind of this universal archetype for me. It's the glue, right? It's the universal glue. And then astrology even accounts for, let's say, the oddball. So the planet Uranus, for example, rules things that would be sudden and unexpected and that don't really conform.
Wow. I wish I could do that stuff. I got to learn this stuff. So I got to hang out with you more. So as far as definitions, again, let's if you would, talk about cartography. Am I saying that right? Cartography, excuse me, cartography. And why are you only one of 90 people who are qualified in this area? Why is that? What's the uniqueness about that?
Well, astrocartography is something that I love. And I got into it because it answered a question in my own life. Honestly, that's what drove me to astrocartography. And it is a very unique blending of astrology and software. Astrocartography is a system that was developed in the 1970s by this guy, Jim Lewis, who was a software developer as well as a really, really good astrologer. And he figured out a way to show where the planets were actually above the Earth when the person was born, right? So it's the theory is that the Earth carries a harmonic resonant memory of that planet.
Wow.
Right? So yeah, so it's brilliant. It's a brilliant system. And I had the good fortune to be driven to it really through my own passion. I love to travel. I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I lived in Maine for a lot of years, but honestly, I grew up in Colorado and I could not figure out why I ended up in Maine and, you know, why I couldn't get out of there. It was like, it took me 33 years, you know, 33 long, cold winters. And it did, you know, it answered that question for me. It explained it for me in a way that I could understand. And so I got into it in the 70s when it first came out. And Jim Lewis passed away in the 1990s. He died. And so there are only a limited amount of people that were able to be certified by him. His work does go on through a website called continuumacg.net, and people can once a year or maybe twice a year, they do offer certification again, but you know, not that many people do it. And I just, my passion allowed me to get into the right thing at the right time.
Wow. Just one more question as far as the finding. This actually comes from a question someone wanted me to ask. A lot of people mix up horoscope with astrology, being the exact same thing. Can you talk about how they are interconnected?
How a horoscope is interconnected with astrology?
Yes.
Well, I would say any good horoscope is derived from astrology. So I write a horoscope every month, and the way I write the horoscope is I calculate a new moon and a full moon chart for the month, and then I just I just kind of sit down and go for it. And what I have to say is based on where the planets are in relationship to each sun sign. So what's another example I could say? Yeah, it does go back to astrology. And again, I guess it depends on the source, who wrote it.
Right. Well, whether it's Dear Abby or an actual astrologer, right?
Yeah.
Good to know. And that's one of the reasons why I follow your newsletter, because I know where this information is coming from.
Clark, I work so hard on my newsletters.
I enjoy them. I mean, they're like, if I don't get them in the course of the month, I'm a little irritated.
Thank you. That's a real compliment. And everything that I write or put out is original. I don't rehash anybody else's work. I make a real sincere effort that what I have to say comes from me.
And let me just say this to anybody who's listening in live. There is a question and answer button, which just say Q&A. If you click on that, you can type in any question, and I will read it out at some point to Ms. Maya White. So I want to dive on in now. I know one of your focuses is helping people find their purpose or place in life. How can knowing or understanding astrology help or guide a person in this area?
Oh my goodness. How could somebody find it without knowing that? Is really the way I feel about it. And again, it's my passion. It's just that thing that I love, because there are so many parts of an astrological chart that show that. So for me, this idea of finding your place in life in location, absolutely. Yes, I do believe there are places that are better or not as good for you. However, you also, within yourself, within your heart and your soul, you have to find your place, right? How you live in your body. And there are so many markers in an astrological chart that will reveal that. One of my favorite ones is what is called the North Node, Node, and the South Nodes. And these are mathematically calculated points, actually. And the North Node I describe as your northern star, like it's your guiding light. If you have any question and you know the right way to ask the question of the North Node, you'll get the right answer.
Wow.
I know that's one piece of it, but of the chart, but it's so rich, and it's a beautiful part.
You mentioned earlier, and I don't want to assume people know some of the terminology, so forgive me if I'm clarifying it, but I want to make sure after people listen to this 45-minute discussion we're going to have, that they come away very clear on some things they may have thought they knew and didn't know. But when you say new moon, what's the difference between a new moon and full moon?
Well, everybody knows the full moon. I think almost everybody knows what the full moon is in the sky. And again, it's a simple matter. Walk outside and look up, right? And what happens at the full moon is you go outside and you see the great big full moon in the sky. And so the new moon is 2 weeks later, when there's actually either no moon or just a very small crescent shaped, the moon in the sky. So again, in thinking of being in tune with the cycles of nature, you can think of the new moon as like starting up the engine, right? It starts that cycle. So when there is no moon, and then so a couple days later is the new moon, the little baby crescent moon, and every night it grows. And at full moon, when you go outside, if you look up in the sky, you will see the moon rising in the east and the sun setting in the west, like the sun sets and the moon rises right exactly at full moon. And actually, in the language of astrology, this is a time when a person can be aware, they can be objective, they can kind of stand back, and they're not so emotionally entrenched in maybe what's going on or what they're feeling, because there's this opposition in the sky. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So to further go down that rabbit hole, I want to ask the question, and I'm sorry, are you getting the feedback? And maybe it's my mic here. I think we're good. So my question is, we talked about with Dawn James, who came on, that we are essentially energy and we operate on a vibrational cycle, pull, you name it, but we are vibration. We're in movement. We're waves, and we know that the moon and other celestial objects cause, in the case of the moon, it caused tides to come in and out, which has to be some sort of force on a energetic or vibrational source. One can only assume if it affects the ocean, it must affect us in some way. Is that safe to say?
I would say that's safe to say.
And does astrology help us in understanding those effects?
One level of astrology will help you to understand those effects, and that would be in, let's say, a branch called mundane astrology, where it's like a chart of the moment. So when I said I do a chart, I calculate the new moon and the full moon chart when I write my horoscopes. Those are mundane charts, and so they're kind of like, it's like taking a camera, right? Like getting a little snapshot of what's going on in this moment, and you want to see the cycle of the moon. And then of course it can get, it can wind down much more deeply into what was that cycle when a person was born, because it will always be with them. And maybe to go back a bit in your first question, one of the things, so a person that wants to, kind of like get in tune with the moon in their everyday life, it's helpful to just kind of be aware of, when is the full moon, when is the new moon, and that the new moon would be a time, let's say, to initiate a project. Let's say, you want to start a fitness routine or something, and if you start this at the new moon, then you've got this impetus, this idea of growth going on. Or let's say that the other cycle is after the moon is full, then it gets smaller every night in the sky. So that would be like a decreasing cycle. So again, kind of just having an awareness in your own life as to what is going on in the sky is helpful. There are some people who I think, so I'm gonna, actually this is a good place maybe to talk about this. Some people, let's say, worship the moon or something, and I don't think that that's what astrology is about. I think some people think that's what astrology is about, is worshiping the moon as a deity or worshiping these planets, and it's not, that to me is not astrology. Astrology is a much more, I think it's a bit more analytical, and it's, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is organic. I don't know if that's a good word.
It's one of my favorite.
Organic lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. And I just asked the question just to, I love to get people to think a little bit differently or go further down, as I say, the rabbit hole on the effects that, when we have certain moods and we don't quite know why, we're upset about something, or we're in this energetic, free thinking mode. Could this be a part of a celestial cycle? Could this be more than just, happenstance and chance? And if it is, then learning astrology, or learning at least a baseline level of astrology, like you said, just being conscious of where the moon is. Is it in incline or decline? Is it at the full or the new? And not just looking at, well, what month am I in? Or it's February, it's, what's that mean?
Well, for sure. And I mean, another way to think of it is like a weather report. People go and they find out what's the weather
every day.
And astrology, to me, is, knowing what's going on in the day-to-day or week-to-week. Astrology is kind of like a weather report.
That's a great analogy. There are people, we talked about this before we started recording, I mentioned it, that since they don't understand the science behind astrology, they become leery of it. And so if you could just talk about maybe one or whatever you want, talk about the myth that that you hear from people as you either coach or talk to or speak with or do readings with about astrology.
Okay, here's my number one complaint. Here's my number one expose of a myth. I tell people I'm an astrologer and they ask me to read their palm.
Ooh. Mm.
My second one is I tell people I'm an astrologer and they ask me to read their tarot cards, or they, they ask me if I'm a psychic, and they ask me for a psychic reading. And, astrology is an intuitive art. And in terms of like going down the rabbit hole, palmistry is an intuitive art. These are all just different branches. But I think to answer your question, it is that astrology is just, it's formulated from the date, time, and place of birth. It's not numerology. Numerology comes from your birth name.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you pointed that fact out, because I think I left it out, or we didn't mention it, that astrology for you, the individual, starts at that place and point of time of your birth. Do you believe that from that second of creation here on earth, when you come into this realm, and from the time that you leave, I'd be curious to know that, do you believe it's within our power to shape that, or is it destiny?
I believe it's our responsibility to shape it.
I'm glad you said that, because so many people that I bump into are under the narrative that it's all preordained, and I was supposed to be at this spot. There was nothing I could do about it. And I've always fought back against that. It just doesn't make sense to me, but I understand many people do believe in kind of that destiny approach, and we have no control.
Well, I'm not denying destiny or denying fate. I believe that plays a part, and I've received both sides of that. I've been on the good side of fate, and I've been on the bad side of it. myself, but then it goes back to this thing of it's what you do with it, and that's your responsibility. And an example of how astrology would help a person to, let's say, activate or empower their free will is, again, it's like, if you think of it like, I'm looking at this photograph, here's the picture, and you look at the picture and like, how do I want to improve it? How do I want to change it? And astrology can be very, very specific in saying, this is really what you need to work on to change it. This is, and furthermore, you know, this is your potential, this is your roadblock. And then, you know, in a reading, you'll tell the person, hey, you know, I see Saturn is XYZ and it affects you this way. And they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, and then they either hear it or they don't hear it, or they want to hear it. And then they have a tool to correct it.
Yeah. You know, since we were talking about that, and I'm being silly, but what are your thoughts on Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson and his denouncement of Pluto, declassification of sorts? And I jokingly, I mean, I don't know, I can't keep up with it. I think they reestablished it as a planet, or I don't know, but that certainly has, does that have any effect on how astrology played itself out, that Pluto was or was not, or is not a planet?
No.
Okay.
I mean, that's a completely, this guy was, you know, an astronomer, correct? And it's a just, you know, I guess it's this thing of like science, you know, astronomy versus astrology, and based on astronomy, if they don't wish to, you know, officially classify Pluto as a planet, that's really, I mean, this is honestly something we could talk about the mythology just of this idea for an hour, but Pluto still does very much play a role in astrology. And there is another character, archetype, planet / asteroid, Chiron, that was discovered in the 1970s. And, you know, Chiron has never really been classified as a planet, but Chiron is a big, big player in astrology.
Just out of curiosity, because I have not heard of it, where would its location generally be? In between?
Chiron is a planet / asteroid, and he orbits between, in the asteroid belt, so between Mars and Jupiter. And it actually is thought to have perhaps been a comet that got captured in the gravitational pull of the sun. So it has like a kind of a wildly elliptical orbit. But Chiron is known as the wounded healer of astrology, or teacher, mentor, shapeshifter. And the word Chiron, Chiron, has its core in the word Christos, which means hands-on healer. So chiropractor is a hands-on healer. And it's this idea of an actual physical, like healing power in the hands and laying of the hands, you know, on a person, or being able to heal them. So people that have Chiron activated in their chart have that gift. You know, they have the gift of hands-on healing. Some use it professionally, some use it just in their everyday life. But this is, I mean, this is just one more little tidbit, you know. Yeah. But so Chiron's not officially a planet either, but it's a big, big player.
And since we mentioned it, for the layman, I mean, not a very technical definition, but the difference between an astronomy and astrology.
Astronomy would be the scientific study of the movement of the planets and the stars, the galaxies, everything that's, you know, above the earth. And I'm going to say astrology is an interpretive art, and based on what the astronomers measure. How's that?
I like that. And can the two coexist?
I think so.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned, I've never heard of, as I said before, Chiron, but it makes sense because there are, there are people that you get, I'm just going to use masseuse, that are so gifted, you think that it has to be something magical that they're doing. And it makes sense that some people are just gifted healers, and it doesn't matter what school they went to or how much they studied. It's just when they touch you, they have this, they some kind of way they correct their energy flow in your body in a way that you can't describe.
Yeah, it's a huge, it's a huge gift. And another example is if a person had Chiron, let's say at the top of their chart, what's called the midheaven, that person, that's a signature of a person who wants to be an earth healer.
Wow. Oh, like
somebody that's actually into something like recycling, or that, wants to heal the earth.
So, all right. So I have two-part question, but let's
Okay.
let's talk about what a chart is, a person's chart, so that we have a full understanding of that.
Okay. I should have brought one. Maybe, let's see. I have charts everywhere. Oh dear, I need a good one. A chart, here's an example. You probably really can't see it that well.
We can see it.
Can you?
Yes, that's excellent.
This is just one chart wheel. And a chart is actually a circle that is derived using the date, time, and place of birth of a person. And so there is what would be called sun sign astrology. Sun sign is like, okay, I'm a Scorpio, so etc. The astrologer's chart is just a more, again, I guess it's like our tool. So it's a 12 house wheel. Each one of the houses of astrology has certain issues that it addresses, or certain teachings. And then if one were to calculate the chart, we want the time of birth is helpful. It's not essential, but it's helpful, because that orients where the beginning is. That orients what would be called house number 1. So after that, depending on where the planets fall in this pattern, is the story that you get.
I would imagine, just listening to you describe that another variable would be where you're born, in terms of, because that affects the chart, right? If you're in the United States versus if you're in Asia.
Well, yeah, but it's all a reflection of time, Clark.
Ah, I see your point.
It's a reflection of time. So it's that moment, it's the same moment anywhere on Earth, but the location will orient the 12 house wheel.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Time is different in different places, although they're simultaneously going on at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the sun, it might be midnight on one place on the Earth, and it actually is midnight on one place on the Earth, and high noon on the other.
So the second part of the question, now that we've established what a chart is, you talk a lot about finding your place in life, and we all kind of say that is, what is my purpose? Are you saying that your chart can help you in that journey in figuring out whether you're a planet healer or healer of people, or innovator, or does that kind of help you navigate that?
Well, I think very much it helps you. It helps anybody navigate it, and I don't come to astrology as a defender of it. I guess I come to life as a sincere seeker and a questioner. And I think most people are seekers and questioners. I think there's a reason that everybody's here on Earth at this time. And so one's astrological chart is going to help them, and often it will, let's say, confirm things that maybe you already thought, or it'll help validate something, and hopefully inspire you to dig in and do it better or do it more.
Wow. And by the way, I'm going to get, this is my 50th year on Earth, and I'm going to get you to do a chart reading. I now know that's my destiny of my own. I really want to know, because I've had, like, I feel like I know what my purpose in 50 years at least should have been, and most of the time it hasn't always, but certainly should have been. But I fought against it, and I'd be interested to see if the numbers play themselves out.
Oh yeah, like I say, the North Star, you know, that with the North Node, it's your North Star, and some people don't have that question. I've heard Oprah Winfrey's not into astrology, but honestly, I think it's because she doesn't understand it. But she's been successful without that, you know, and I'm not saying that a person cannot be successful, but again, it's this deeper, core of our spiritual self. And it's that question when you lie awake at night and say, you know, why am I here? What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? What am I supposed to really, really do? Or what's my next step? I would say astrology will guide you on that.
Well, in the case of when you point out how Oprah's success, she's successful even without it, it still doesn't maybe explain why in some way. Because for instance, I have seen Dr. Henry Gates. You know, he does a program where he researches people's genealogy, and he may go back in time and discover that your ancestors from 3 generations back were in the same profession that you are in currently. So if you're an instructor or teacher, you have a lineage of that going on. So certainly you becoming one wasn't inherently based on the fact that you knew it, but I always, it makes them, you can see it in their eyes when he tells them that they're like, that's why, you know, they have connectedness.
Absolutely. And you know what, Clark, I've been doing some research on astrocartography in terms of finding one's lineage or one's ancestry, because what I'm seeing more and more almost every time is that your lineage will show up in your astrocartography map. So regardless of where you were born, you go to these other places in the world, and they have, you know, will have powerful lines. In fact, I'm giving a talk on that in what month? In May, to the local astrology group. And yeah, I'm gonna talk about that and really develop that as a topic, because it's so interesting, right?
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I mean, there's so many areas that you can discover. It seems like it's I would have, hopefully I'm not being presumptuous in this, is that just because you get one reading doesn't mean that that's not something that I'm assuming it constantly ebbs and flows, right?
I think of it as peeling the onion. And I'm a person who has done astrology, probably looked at my chart or somebody else's chart, or been aware of astrology every day since age 14.
Wow.
And I would say that I could still look at my own chart, or I could have another astrologer, or even someone who doesn't know that much about astrology, look at my chart and point out something new. I had that happen in a workshop that I was giving. I was doing a workshop with my oracle cards, and this woman who knew nothing about astrology, really, she was a total novice, but she looked at my layout, and she looked me in the eye and said something to me that was just like, you know, took me aback because it was so right on, and it's something I hadn't necessarily figured out myself about myself.
Constantly learning. I love life. You talked about intuition. You brought it up in a question that you answered before, and I know you're an intuitive mentor, coach, or a guide. What's your definition of intuition?
My definition of intuition is I'm trying to really, think about how this could be related to inward versus outward influences. I think intuition, good intuition, is really almost a body sensation, the right intuition. And I think it is something that is very natural in every human being. It's a part of who we are as a human. Some people shut it down. And it's a natural, energetic feeling. It's a way of getting information instantaneously. It would be, let's say it's an antenna, a natural antenna on every body. So the person does have to receive the information from an outer source, right? It has that external branch, but the internal is comes from you. And I'm going to say intuition is a knowing and a feeling and a believing of information.
Would you say could it be synonymous with the principle of the third eye, or is that something a little different?
I think the third eye is a little bit different. I think the third eye is very specific in terms of wisdom.
Okay.
And understanding. Whereas intuition is a much more, body-based. It's a much more direct, direct information. So the third eye, I'll give you this as an example of astrology. Okay, the third eye would be ninth house. The ninth house is wisdom. It's higher learning. So it's university learning, right? Like understanding what the facts and the figures say. The third house is the facts and the figures, right? And those two houses are opposite in astrology. So to me, intuition's like a third house. It's information.
You mentioned that some people shut theirs down, and probably unknowingly. In most cases, how can one awaken their intuition?
I think, Clark, really, I don't want to sound trite or repetitious, but this idea of meditation, taking time to connect is step one. You just have to slow down and feel and learn about your body and learn about your connection and learn to connect in a way that is not intellectual. People get stuck in their heads.
We only have a few minutes left. I can't believe it. I knew it was going to go fast because this is anything I'm really passionate about goes like in 2 seconds, we're done. But I think we've covered a lot. And my last question is on astrocartography. Now, I saw you speak on helping people identify their place on Earth for success. Can you elaborate what that means in terms of astrocartography?
Well, yeah, there are, again, if you think of the astrocartography as a map, and you know what I'll do, Clark, I can, for the link, for the replay, I can give you a couple of links if you want in the description. I have some information, a couple of programs that I've presented that people can look at. That just for details on both astrology and astrocartography. So the theory of astrocartography, or the premise, is that there will be a certain places on Earth where like it just goes better, So for example, if we were to discuss what planets are, the sun, S-U-N, the sun is considered to be like your actualization. It's how you shine. The sun is where you shine. So let's say somebody has been living in a zone when they were born, where they were born, the planet Neptune was overhead. Well, Neptune is very watery and murky, and Neptune can bring a lot of misunderstandings. So if this person were to actually physically move to where their sun line is, it would help them shine. It's like, you know, the light breaks through the water. So there is this idea of, you know, actual physical location. A person would want to go to a place where either, let's say, the sun or Jupiter or Venus, one of the more beneficial planets, were actually above. And not everyone can move at every time. So another aspect of astrocartography is that you can bring objects from that area into your home or into your life.
Wow.
So if a person has a very empowered line, let's say it's over India, and they don't want to move to India, they can bring art or food from that area into their home.
I never thought about that, the power of that. That is transformational. Wow.
That's called remote activation, and that was one of the techniques taught by Jim Lewis, the man who invented astrocartography.
Wow. I'll just say this in the time we have. I can certainly relate. I've lived in many cities and many states, but I went to New Mexico once, and I felt like I was on heaven on earth, and I couldn't put a reason. It wasn't anything particularly out of sorts. It was just something that just grabbed me, and even to this day, and that was probably over a decade ago, and still to this day, I think about moving back there and don't even know why, right? I spent 3 days there, but it was the most magical time that I've ever had. And I didn't do anything. I didn't go to an amusement park. I didn't go, you know, it was like in the middle of winter, but it was something about that area, that place, and it's just still draws me to it. So I certainly understand when you say there's location plays a big part of some alignment.
Yeah. And, you know, it would be interesting. We'll take a look at in your personal astrocartography map, you know, what is that? We can name it.
Wow. See,
through astrology.
Love it. I cannot wait. In fact, I'll definitely be reaching out to you this week so that we can start the process, because I think it's time. 50 years, I get a good round, you know, idea of what's going on. Hopefully I got another 50.
Well, that's your Chiron return, Clark. So this is it's another astrology thing, but yeah, it's a good time.
Excellent. Well, before we go, and it's been a pleasure, please tell everybody not only how they can find you, how they can also get their charts read and established, but if you have any events coming up, you talked about a speaking event, anything like that, please tell our listeners now.
Okay, so the first thing I would like to say is that my website is the same as my name. It's mayawhite.com, and that's really the portal. If you go to my website, you'll have access to almost everything about me and everything I do. And I would encourage people to sign up for my newsletter. And there is a newsletter sign up box right on my website, mayawhite.com. And then also in terms of, getting like daily astrology, we talked about kind of the weather report. I do that a lot on my Facebook page, which is Astrologer Maya White. And I don't do it every day, but I do pretty regular, daily astrology posts. And my passion, again, another just aspect of what I love about astrology is I want to make astrology easy to understand. I want to take out this complex language or, talking in circles. I really, really try and want to be straightforward. And when I say something, I want people to know what it means and what it's talking about. I always strive for that. So there's the Facebook page, the newsletter, and then all of my services are available through my website. I do offer readings, and that's something I love to do. I truly, truly love working one-on-one. I will be launching a program early next month. I'm going to be launching a one-on-one coaching program called the Astrology Code. I'll be doing a webinar, and this is really a unique system that I've developed that addresses some of these things that we talked about today. Chiron, the North Node. These are things I just think are keys to survival, or I'm going to say keys to wisdom in astrology. So that would be, you know, thank you, you know, what I would love to have people do. And my talk will be given at the LA, Los Angeles NCGR group, and I'll have that posted on my website and also on my Facebook page.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for being our guest. It's been a wonderful time as always. And for everyone else, please visit my website again at clarkgarrison.com for a list of upcoming guests and as well as former guests that we've had on. All of the replays are there. Also follow me at YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Clark Garrison. On that YouTube channel, you'll see edited versions of all of the speakers that we've had, answering a lot of questions about how to be the best you that you can possibly be through mind, body, and spirit points of views. Our next guest will be Miss Shelley Chapman, who will be discussing body, food, and freedom. This is March 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I want to thank everybody for being a guest. And as I always say, please don't be average, because it's the best of the worst and the worst of the best. And you certainly don't want to be any of the above. So thanks so much for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.